Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for coming out. My name is Jackie Goldstein, and this session I called Mashups Are Not Just for Browsers. So how many of you are here because you don't really know what mashups are? You're kind of embarrassed when you go to cocktail parties, people start asking you questions, and you say, well, all I know is VB, C#, SQL Server, and I don't really know about this cool mashup stuff. So I'm glad to see a lot of hands. This is a level 200 session, so what that means is we're not going to get deep into code. We will have some code, but the code is really just to illustrate a lot of the concepts. We'll keep the concepts high. I want you to walk away basically with three things. Number one, I want you to be able to have those exciting conversations at the cocktail parties about mashups, since everybody's talking about them. I want you to walk away and say, wow, that's really cool, and I can do some really cool stuff with it. I want you to say, wow, that's really easy. As a developer, even though I've developed in other domains, I can do that very easily. The tools are there, the information is there. And I want to make sure that you walk away with a good understanding of what information, what resources are available. So we'll take a look at a lot of the sites. I mean, even just on Microsoft.com, whatever domain you're working in, I'm sure there's a lot of information up there that would be very useful to you. You just don't know about it. I remember I recently found out, I don't know, half a year ago, on the patterns and practices part of Microsoft.com, there's tons of checklists on security this and security that. Instead of having to read through the 1,000-page books, a lot of very useful practical guides and checklists on security. So the same thing it is for anything on Microsoft.com. A lot of stuff out there. We don't always know that's there, so we just need somebody to point us in that direction to get us started. So that's what I hope we'll do in this session. Well, we're doing mashups, which is a lot more fun than security, right? Okay. Just a little bit about me before we get started. My name is Jackie Goldstein. My company is Renaissance Computer Systems. We specialize in consulting, training, and development with Microsoft tools and technologies. I've written a book on data access with VB.net. This session is actually a little bit of an extension of my domain. I usually end up talking about some aspect of data access, and this is just, you can argue with data access, it's just a lot more fun, a lot more interesting, and really kind of the wave of the future if you see where a lot of the web applications and non-web applications are going. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP, which means that there are at least a couple of people in Microsoft who think I know what I'm talking about. I run a monthly user group, and I do a lot of speaking at conferences in the US and Europe, so I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people like yourselves. So this is the agenda. This is what I want to cover in the next hour. Number one, what is a mashup? Why should I care? Why is it exciting to anybody? And that we'll talk about in sort of in general terms, regardless of whether you're trying to build a mashup that's a web application or a mashup that's a non-web application. The concepts and directions and the things you need to know are pretty much the same. Then we'll dig into some specific tools on the Microsoft Live Development Platform, specifically Search, Virtual Earth, and Windows Live ID. And I'll get into it in a little bit, explain why I picked those three specifically. And then, after some other examples, I'll go through my Northwind mashup. As I mentioned to you, I'm a database guy, so I can't really do a presentation that doesn't include the Northwind database. So I managed to get that in here, and you'll see the mashup that I wrote, and we'll walk through that a little bit. And then we'll finish up with where do I go for ideas of mashups, where do I go for data that I want to bring into my mashups. So even the New York Times is talking about mashups. This goes back to a month and a half ago. They had an article on mashups. Let's just bring that up. We won't go through the whole article, but you can see what it is, what they're talking about. They talk about the different tools that Microsoft, IBM, Intel, all these different companies are coming out with for building mashups. It's a nice little article, just as a quick overview. What struck me a little bit was the title of this article. And here I'm going to go out a bit on a limb, because there's something very interesting about the title of the article. Some of you will get it, and it'll bring a smile to your face. And some of you won't, and I'll feel really bad and I'm really old that you don't. How many of you ever, when it talks about do the mash, do you have any idea what it's referring to? Oh, great. Okay, so do the mash was this weird one-time hit that was popular in 1962. And it's basically the story of a mad scientist who, in the middle of his lab, brought a monster to life. And he had this party, and he brought all the other monsters to this party to do the Monster Mash dance. So we'll just... How many of you are smiling now and remember this? Raise your hands, otherwise I'm going to feel really bad. Okay.
Then suddenly, to my surprise, he did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. He did the monster.
Okay, that's enough to bring smiles to our face. We can get back to work now. So even the New York Times is talking about it. Let's get back to basics. What's a simple one-sentence definition? Wikipedia. Mashup is a website or an application that combines content from more than one source into an integrated experience. Let's expand that a little bit. What are we doing? We're rapidly building applications. Again, the word rapidly is relative. Sometimes we're writing code. Sometimes if we're using a tool like Popfly or some other tools, we're really doing it much faster with a lot less code. But we're combining available services, available data from different sources. We add glue ourselves. It means we're deciding how to combine and mix and match these pieces and these data. And we build an application. The granularity is fairly large. We're taking big chunks of data, not really drilling down very deeply into the small parts of the data. But overall, we're building an app and an experience for the user that's much greater than the 1, 2, or 3 different sources of data. And we'll take a look at 2 classic examples. One is the real estate listings that uses a combination of their internal real estate listings with virtual earth maps, and then locallive.com, which is also Microsoft's search engine combined with virtual earth maps. And we'll get to that in a second. I want to bring back this slide. This is a great example also of, again, anybody recognize this slide from previous tech eds? Steve Mather's demo? Microsoft asked me not to show that video anymore, but I want to stick in this one slide because it's really a classic example of what it is. Here it is. We have a single integrated application for a receptionist in a doctor's office. And this application looks like one single application, but it's really bringing data from many different sources, many different web services. We have a calendar service over here. Underneath here, we have a service for locating taxi companies and calling them to send taxi over. We have here connection to the internal databases, the internal information systems of different managed care providers that this doctor is associated with, and then information on the distance, some sort of mapping information. How do I get to the different clinics or the different doctors? And if we look at it, they didn't call it a mashup then. This was just how do we start using web services? But if we look at it today, we would call it a mashup. Mashup usually refers to something that's a little bit less enterprise, a little bit more social related, but it's really the same exact idea, the same technologies, and the same tools that you're using. A couple of buzzwords, make sure you're up to speed on that you'll see very often in these discussions. AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML for making those, updating your web pages without having to make a full round trip to the server. SOAP, one of the interfaces, one of the more popular interfaces for accessing web services over the web. REST is another alternative interface that's gaining popularity now. Even in the Microsoft world, SOAP was out there first when they started working with web services. Today, in .NET 3.5, you see support for REST as well. So REST is a somewhat simpler protocol. It's more the simple get and puts as opposed to the RPC orientation of SOAP. Some web services will have one or the other. Some of them will have both interfaces. Another latecomer to the game now is JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, which is basically if SOAP and REST are competitors, as it were, for the protocol, on the wire, the JSON is a competitor for XML. It's how do we format the data that we're sending over the wire? And if you go search on the web, you can find lots of interesting discussions and arguments over whether JSON is better, XML is better. It's just a different notation, a different way of passing the actual data that we want to send the actual message over the web. Screen scraping. Screen scraping is the oldest of techniques, of technologies. That's where we don't have a web service really, but we know that this web page being displayed has the information that we want, and we want to scrape that data off of it. That means we're going to go ahead, look at the tags, find the tag, and hope that, okay, if I want to know what the exchange rate is for the dollar to the euro, I'll go to some page, I will find whatever tag is enclosed in, and pull out that number. What's the problem with that, of course? Problem is when they go ahead and they change that page, and in that same location, instead of having the exchange rate, they have the current temperature. Right? So we're getting a number, we're going to think it's the exchange rate, the temperature. We could end up making a pretty bad deal if we do that. But that, again, when there's no choice, that's an alternative that has been used in the past. And when we're talking about data feeds, we have the RSS and the ATOM protocols. So this is just some of the buzzwords you should be aware of that are in this playing field. So let's take a quick look at some mashups that are out there. These are mostly commercial mashups. Just some idea of what some people are doing, get our imaginative juices going, and then we'll move on to actually how do we build these. What's interesting about this demo is that they integrated Virtual Earth to hook up with their real estate listings in less than 3 weeks. And we'll see the experience. It really makes it a very good experience for the users. We'll take a look at a couple of others. I want to give you the idea that this is actually a very popular type of application for real estate agents because it's a lot of added value, not a lot of added work. I think in some ways it's actually a little bit more relevant to Europe. In Europe, one of the problems, and Microsoft knows this, and they're working on it, and if we can lobby them, that would be a good thing. But the data in Europe is not always as complete as for the US. But something like real estate listings, you can certainly build a reasonable application, a very, very useful application, without having to drill all the way down to the level of detail that you would for a different type of application. So if you want to get an idea of neighborhoods or relative locations, this is certainly, the data is there even in Europe. So if we go into Washington and we say, okay, I want to go work for Microsoft, so I'm looking for a house in Redmond. And they're basically just matching up 2 different data sources. One is their listings, and one is the map data. So I can go ahead and say, okay, they say, well, there's too many things here. We have to narrow down our search sum. So let's say, okay, I'm only willing to pay up to $1 million. I want at least 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. Okay, still too much. I want a big plot of land. Okay. Now, so each of these icons is a house that this company has available for sale. I could go ahead, scroll down, see more information than this way, but I'm only showing it 10 at a time. But if I say, hey, I'm over here and I want to really live on this road, I can just hover over that icon, get information, get a picture, go ahead and get more details about that property. So this, again, this is a real app being used by a company, integrated Virtual Earth in less than 3 weeks. A couple interesting things to point out about this app is that, number one, as opposed to what we might be used to with the classical ASP applications, the final composition of the data, the final combining of the data, the different data sources, is actually done on the client, not on the server. So the client is bringing down the data from different places, and there he's combining them. So the client is accessing the data for the house listings. He's accessing the data, making the calls from the client for Virtual Earth, and combining them on the client, which is different than our typical web application architecture. But what this does for some of the heavy processing, it distributes it. Instead of having the server overwhelmed with all the processing, part of it, at least a little part relevant to this application, is being done down on each of the local clients. We'll get to this in a second, but dev.live.com is really a central starting point for anything you want to do in this area. And over there, they actually have a link to a bunch of different mashups that people have built, and just run through. We'll come back to dev.live.com in a second. But over here, again, emphasizing the point that a lot of people find this type of application very useful, and presumably relatively easy to implement. Here's another real estate agent. Kind of the same concept, clearly a very different user interface. But I can go ahead here, get this, get the property details in a similar type of way. These 2 applications aren't really terribly different from each other. A little further down, we have something that said, hey, we don't want to be just another one of these real estate sites. We want to go a little bit further. So they're going to actually go ahead and pull in data from additional sources to give you additional information on the area in which you're looking to live. So again, all paths lead to Redmond. So we're going back to Redmond, look for a house in Redmond. And we have our Virtual Earth map. And if I drill down into here, in addition to the information about the area and the houses, I can see information, all the flags are coming up, where the houses are, what their costs are. But I can also get information about Redmond itself. So they're bringing information that says here, Redmond, Washington. What's the median value of housing? How many households are there in this area? What's the population? input per capita. If these are things that are important to you when you're looking to buy a house, this is an additional source or sources of information that this real estate broker has decided to add to their application. So we can go even further down, get the different views. But the point I wanted to show you on this is that they've gone beyond just matching up listings and virtual earth and say, let's bring in other data that's relevant to this domain, what we're working on here. The last sample I want to show you from here is actually a non-commercial app written by somebody as part of a contest. A random day out generator. This is by a guy out in the UK who says okay, it was for a competition, but basically the scenario is, I've got a day to kill in the UK or someplace else. What should I do? So we're here at TechEd, we're going home, let's say it's Saturday, on the way back from TechEd, we want to stop in the UK and do some fun stuff, some interesting stuff to us. So we can choose what day, what country, and then what are some of the activities that we like. We'll leave them all checked off. The one tricky thing is that you have to enter a zip code. So, we'll enter a zip code. And he's going to go out and check all different sources of data. In a second, I'll show you exactly how many different sources of data he took advantage of. But the idea is he's getting these different sources of information and says, okay, within the radius of that zip code, that postal code, here are all the interesting things that you checked off that are of interest to you that you can do. So there's museums, and there's art galleries, and there's movie cinemas, and you can get more information. And of course, you get the map down here as well. Then he also pulls in some geocoded photographs. So if I want to see some pictures that are geocoded at this location, I can go ahead and say, okay, there's a picture over there, and here's a picture over here. He included here a list of the different sources of information that he brought into this application. You can see it's quite extensive. He has both the Microsoft Virtual Earth, Google Maps, different geocoding service for the pictures. He's pulling them in from Geograph and from Flickr, different driving instructions, weather information, all these different information. This is a real mashup. He's pulling in about 10 different sources of information to generate this page, to give the user a very rich experience, a very varied experience that he couldn't go by going, one at a time. He'd have to be jumping around to a million websites, assuming he knew where they were. So that's just a couple of examples of different types of mashups that are out there, and you can go see them at this link over here. I want to dig a little bit now into Windows Live development platform. This was something that was specific to Microsoft, and see what Microsoft has to offer in this area. So this is a slide I included to cut off a lot of your questions. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what is Windows Live? There are a lot of things that are called Windows Live. They seem different. How are they different? How are they the same? Why are they called Windows Live? So I'm going to try to answer that in the next slide and the slide after that as well. So this is a list of services under the heading of Windows Live. They're all WL Windows Live services. Some of them we're probably familiar with. We're all familiar with Hotmail. We're familiar with Windows Live ID, the next version of Passport, and Mail, and with Search and Live.com. How many of you are familiar with, for example, with SkyDrive? Okay, SkyDrive is an offering by Microsoft that's a hard drive in the sky. We have up to 1 gigabyte of data that we can store up in the clouds, so that when I'm running out of the house to a conference and I want to make sure that I have a backup in case something happens to my computer, I can put my presentation and my slides up on a SkyDrive, and it's there no matter where I am, no matter what happens to my computer. A similar thing with the Windows Live favorites. No matter where I am, what computer I'm using, I can always have my favorites accessible to me because they're being stored up in the cloud. So these are all services that Microsoft offers. It's worth checking them out. Now, what's important to note is that these are not all services that are accessible to programmers, to developers. We're going to get to that on the next slide. But these are services that Microsoft has developed, Microsoft is using, and offers them as applications to us, Live, Messenger, etc. Now, on top of some of these services, there are much larger applications that are built. Most of them are really in line with Microsoft's software plus services approach now, which says we have an application, Part of it is on the desktop. Part of it is up as a web service up in the cloud. So we have Xbox Live, Office Live, and Microsoft Dynamics CRM Live, where you have a regular application, but part of the application, additional functionality, is available via services up in the cloud. And those top three above the line there, Xbox, Office Live, and CRM Live, are built on one or more of these services of Microsoft underneath. Now, this slide has fewer pictures on it, but these are the elements, these are the services that are programmably available to us as developers. We can go ahead and program against these different services. They each have different interfaces. Some of them are SOAP, some of them whatever. But these are things that we can go ahead and build and use in our applications. Run through the first couple very quickly. Rich media experience, Silverlight streaming. You've probably heard about that. There's a lot of talk about that at the conference. I have a slide at the end with a list of sessions that you may want to go to if you want to follow up on that. In terms of storage and sharing, there's live spaces for photographs, also live contacts for storing your contact information from your Messenger to your Hotmail account, all of them together. You can use them wherever you go. Other applications, if you give them permission, can access them as well. We talked about Messenger, live alerts. If I want to register to be notified when certain events happen, I can sign up for that as well. Now we're down to the last three on the right. Find and locate, which is live search, virtual earth, and live ID. You know, those are the three that are on my agenda slide that we're going to drill into, we're going to talk about specifically today. And what's special about those, besides perhaps being very popular, very well known, is that those three you can use in any type of application. You can use those services in a web application or in a desktop, a rich client application, as opposed to the services on the first three buckets, where by licensing you're limited to be using them only in web applications. So it's not, I don't really think it's a technological issue. It's a licensing issue, which means that in the future, if we yell and scream enough, perhaps it'll change. But be aware that right now, the only under the heading of this session, which is mashups and non-browser applications, what we have to work with is live search, live ID, and virtual earth. Just in general, these different services often come wrapped up with controls on top of their APIs. And there's some other things to consider in terms of use and licensing. Most of them are available for free up to a certain limit, a very reasonable limit. If your number of transactions or users or whatever is defined in terms of use license exceeds that, then you have to work out a separate commercial deal with Microsoft. But most applications aren't going to reach those limits too quickly. So why should we even consider building on the Windows Live platform? Number one, our target audience is global. It's a platform well known, well recognized by people around the world. Familiarity not only to our potential end users, familiarity to us as developers, that we're used to building with these units, that we're used to the interfaces, they're relatively common, or they try to make them as common as possible. They scale, they've been built by Microsoft to scale to large numbers of users. As you would expect by a platform offering from Microsoft, there's a developer focus on it. It's not an end user focus. Obviously, that's who they're targeting, but there's a tremendous effort and investment in making it easier for us as developers to use these services and these controls. And revenue opportunities. Revenue opportunities, you know, that you can get at that two different ways. One, you could build this great application and get lots of revenues. If you have a successful application and you have to start working on a commercial deal with Microsoft, there are opportunities to have additional revenue opportunities there as well. Let's talk about dev.live.com. That's the starting point where you want to go to work with the Windows Live platform if you're a developer. That's where you have the APIs, documentation, the samples. You have some very cool SDKs up there that we'll see in a second. It'll also point you off to different forums, different blogs, articles, whatever information you need to be more successful using these elements. Let's take a look at that. So here you're oriented by what you want to do. So if I want to work with Virtual Earth, let's say, here's maps here. I get to the page for Virtual Earth. Off of this, I have access RSS feeds, blogs, news, different tools, SDKs, and forums. Similar thing for the other elements on the page as well. We can want to look at the Windows Live SDK, or if I want to go SDK, find my way out there. So this will bring me to a page with all the different SDKs that are available within MSDN. And from there, I can go ahead and say, okay, these are the SDKs that I'm interested in. That's where I want to go. We'll do that a little bit as we move along, but here's a list of all available SDKs as of today. And of course, you have the links to the blogs and the forums, which just saves you a lot of time trying to go ahead and discover all that information on your own. So now I want to dig into these three different services that we're going to work with, and we'll actually start looking at some code to see how easy it is to work with them. So the Windows Live Search is a Microsoft Search offering, search service. It's in terms of developers, it's a SOAP API that we can call from any different application, desktop or browser-based. And the basic resources for that are over here on Live Search. You could actually incorporate this in several different ways. In addition to the SOAP API, which I'll demo in a minute, you could also go ahead and include on your web page an AJAX control. So it'll run you through a little wizard now that says, okay, define a few of the properties. How do you want this box to look? You step through the steps. It'll generate some code for you. You can just copy that and paste that into your application. This is an interesting thing. I'm not sure which came first, the Search SDK or the Virtual Earth SDK, but these are interactive SDKs. So for example, here on the Search SDK, if I want to know what the search know how to do, here's the different tasks. So let's just say a basic web search. Shows me the results of the search. Here I'm searching for the Seattle Mariners. It'll also then show me the source code for that search. So if I say, what's the code for a basic search? Where do I start looking? I don't want to start looking through all the different objects in MSDN. Well, here's some sample code. So you can copy and paste this and get started very quickly. And then when you need to dig in and say, okay, what does this parameter have to be, or what does that parameter mean? I can go, it'll give you a link into the actual reference on MSDN. So you can see that all the different things. If you want to say specify safe search, what does that mean? What does that look like? I can go ahead and see all these different things if I want to create an image search, etc. So it's the SDK is here. It's very interactive. Of course, if you want to just download a classical SDK to work with offline, you've got that as well. But the cool thing here is you get to see how it works. You get to see the source code, and then you get the pointers into the actual documentation. What can you do on Windows Live Search? One interesting thing is search macros. We can go ahead and define your own custom searches. You can define them customly for yourself. Go ahead and make those URLs public to other people. Go ahead and use them as well. If you want to have a search, if I want to have a search across only Spanish newspapers or Spanish magazines, I can set up a search query macro to do just that. I can use that myself and then share that URL with other people as well. Again, you go up there, you log in, set up your own, go through a wizard, they'll set this up for you and give you the URL to go ahead and share with other people. And then there's the more generic, much more flexible SOAP API, where we can go ahead and make web service calls to go ahead and use and see what the results from the search are. So let's go ahead and take a look at code for that. Let's just run the app first, and then we'll take a look at the code. So here's my own custom form, classic WIN form. I want to type in here, TechEd 2007, search, have it go out, do the search, populate this list box with the titles of the search results. I specified bring me only the first 10. That's what it did. I can specify up to 50. I go, okay, I want that article. I go ahead, I'm going to fetch that and navigate to that URL over here in this browser control. So this just shows how I built my own custom little search page. Another thing I can do as I walk through the code, we'll make a change to that. The code is actually pretty simple. Again, this is using WCF, so here I'm setting up my WCF endpoints and channels, etc. So that's just to get everything set up. Here, I'm configuring my request. I'm having one simple request. I fill in this object, what I want to search the entire web, I want to bring back all information, I only want a maximum of 10 results, start from 0. Here's my app ID. Before I can go ahead and use the search API, I have to go ahead and register, let Microsoft know who I am. And that's just a simple process. You go up to the website, log in with your passport, and you get this app ID, and you just include that in your app. So when they want to watch how many queries, transactions you're making a day, they have some way of tracking you by this app ID. Here's if I wanted to include some geocode information in my query, which in this case we're not going to use, but I can fill that in. What I'm going to do now is pull in the text from the text box. Search flags, we'll have that as none. We'll come back and change that a little bit later on. Here's where all the action happens. I make the web service call on the channel, pass in the search request, get the result. Now I want to see how many responses I have in that result. Assuming I have more than one, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the list box with each of those, displaying in the list box the title field of the response object. The only other code I have here is on when I select a new item. When the selected item index changes on the list box, I'm going to go ahead and just do a standard navigate on the web browser control to the URL of that selected item. Now let's go ahead. If you remember what we saw in the demo, the titles were pretty short. It was pretty hard to figure out exactly which article I wanted from the title. So let's go ahead, let's make this box a little bit shorter, and add another text box. Oops, where'd it go? We'd add another text box over here. I want to just go ahead and display the description of the item, not just the title. So we're going to make this a multi-line text box. Pull it up over here. That'll actually be enough for us. Just bump up the font so you can see it. And I just have to stick in a line of code to populate it. So I'm going to go ahead and this is text. Text box. Oh. One. Text equals. Get rid of that. And I'm going to come back here, and on this, the selected item is a result item. And if we go ahead and see what properties it has, one of the properties that it has that we're interested in now is the description property. So we're going to go ahead and just simply display the description down in that text box. So on the same query again, text 7. Now when I select something, I first off get the description, and then the browser can catch up and display whatever he wants to display over there. That was just to give you an idea of how it's pretty intuitive, pretty easy to add new functionality into your custom app based on the available properties of the objects that's in the SOAP API. Here, if you're interested, this is a file that's automatically generated by the WCF engine, which is basically the proxy to the web service. That's where we're making the web service calls. So that's search. Next thing I want to talk about is Virtual Earth. I guess we're all familiar with Virtual Earth. It's both an end-user tool. You can get to it at local.live.com. We've seen a lot of applications. You may use it for your own searching as well. Again, it also has a SOAP API for us to program against. In addition, to get the interactive aspects, the mapping aspects, there's a JavaScript control. And again, even though it's a JavaScript control, we can use it in terms of licensing. We can use it in a WinForms application. We just stick it inside a browser control, which we'll see when I get to my demo a little bit later on. There's another tool that came out recently, a map cruncher, which lets you add your own mapping information and combine that there as well. The JavaScript control is a new version. This came out, I think, in the last month, version 6. So that's running here. You may see in a lot of the other demos and applications, they're still working on version 5. You can tell just from the the controls, the navigation controls, which version they're using. So I upgraded it to that. What can you do with Virtual Earth? Basically, depending on your play, you can, if you're a business, you can get closer interaction with your customers, give them more information, make it more useful for them. On the other side, you can get more information about your customers back to you. You can easily, from your customer database, plot which customers have bought which products in which areas. Go ahead, plot that on a map, give you that graphical information. You can go ahead and then decide, okay, where should I be investing my resources? What should I be doing differently, etc. So it's an easy graphical way to get information out to your customers, as well as to collect information back from your customers and use it as you see fit. Basically, there's two ways to get to this data: the map control, which is the Ajax JavaScript control, and the SOAP APIs. And we'll take a look at them in a little bit. There's some of the basic concepts that you need to know: latitude and longitude location, the view extent, how much do we want to see, the zoom. We'll see how we can go ahead and add those different push pins to identify specific areas that are of interest to us on the map, draw lines, polylines, etc. Another nice thing is we can handle mouse events. When I get to my Northwind mashup, we'll see one or two of the tricks that you need to hook that into a WinForms application. And of course, the different views that you're used to seeing: the road, the aerial, the hybrid, the 3D, the bird's eye view, etc. What I want to do now is I want to take a quick look at the SDK, see some of the functionality of the Virtual Earth, and we'll come back to Virtual Earth later on as part of the Northwind mashup to take a deeper look at some of the other functionality there as well. But here too, we have this very neat, easy to learn, interactive SDK. So I start with my map and I say, okay, what in the world do I want to do now? So this is showing the default map. Okay, the default map, not too interesting. Okay, let me show a specific map. Of course, this is the Space Needle in Seattle, 3D view, much more exciting map. What did I have to do differently to do that? Not very much. Basically, the only thing that's different here is this one line of code that says load this map at this location, this latitude and this longitude, this zoom level. I want to have a hybrid view, it means aerial and road, and then some other parameter, which if I don't know what that is, I go ahead, look it up here, and say, oh, that's just a tile buffer. So here I get the link right into my reference docs. And I want to say, okay, what are my options for the zoom? Zoom can go from 1 to 19. Again, easy tool to see what do I need to know. Okay, things like show and hide nav control. This is one of the tip-offs that is version 6, not version 5. If you remember some of the other things you've seen, it has a different navigation control. So this is a tip-off that it's version 6, so I can go ahead and use this. Obviously, I can go ahead and change this, but if I want to see now, to show and hide that, and what size do I want it to be, go ahead and change the size to a smaller size or even tiny size, or choose not to show it at all. Go ahead and look at the source code. So here it is set dashboard size. It's still called a dashboard. I go ahead and set the small, tiny, different constants for each of those. If I want to have a better idea, again, pop over into the reference manual, see what my choices are for dashboard size. So it gives you an idea of some of the things I can do with that. Again, if I want to look at some other things, use default shapes, different shapes to identify the specific areas. Show and hide a shape. What does that mean? Go ahead. Okay. And we'll come back to using Virtual Earth as part of a larger mashup demo as opposed to just a standalone demo, which it is over here. The third element that I want to talk about is Windows Live ID. And Windows Live ID is really something that ties a lot of these services together, but it's a single ID, a single sign-on that you can use within your application and to access many of the different Microsoft services as well. So it's really used within the majority of Microsoft's online services. There are a couple of different SDKs, a couple of different things that you could work with. So if you're building a web application, and I'm going to mention one or two things about the web authentication just so you get a full picture, we'll focus in and I'll demo the client, which client SDK. So the web authentication is a toolkit that allows you to make the calls to redirect the user who wants to log into your site to do the authentication via Windows Live, and then go ahead and come back to your website and continue with that authentication information in your hand. Another thing that just came out, this was a challenging presentation because every time I turned around, something new came out from Microsoft. This is about a week old, the Windows Live ID Client SDK, which is specifically for applications like I'm trying to talk about in this session, applications that are not browser-based. If you're building rich client applications and you still want to take advantage of Windows Live ID, this SDK just came out, and we'll see how that works and what you can do with it. But basically, it lets you as a developer, lets us as developers, build our rich client applications, still use Windows Live ID to authenticate, obviously over the web, and then use that authentication to access other services as well as personalizing our own specific applications. So I just want to run through this just so you understand how similar the client authentication process is to the web authentication process, which you're probably more familiar with. So basically, the user requests a web page, gets the web page back with the sign-in link. The user tries to sign in. That sign-in will take him to the standard Windows Live ID page. User enters his credentials. He's authenticated, hopefully, by Windows Live, and then gets redirected back to our site. And then we can go ahead and do whatever we want. Display this information for that user, just say, hello, Jackie, whatever it is. But we know that this user has been authenticated. We get back something to identify that user. It's not his name, it's not his password, but something that says, for this application, this is the ID you use for this user. So when this user comes back next week, next month to our same application, we get that same authentication result from Windows Live ID. We say, okay, we know it's this user. This user we just know that he's back. If we asked him on our own that we want to collect some of his data for our app to register on our app, we can do that and store that in our application's own database. The process for the client application is pretty much the same. We have the end user's machine. Here's our application that we're building. We can go ahead and do the authentication via the SDK. This is the Windows Live ID for client applications. Via the one or two calls there, we go to the Live ID authentication server. It says, yes, this user is who he says he is. We get back, again, something to identify that user for our application, which we can then store and use that to index whatever information we want to save about that user in our application. We know he's authenticated, and we can identify him, so we know he wants to have these settings or whatever it is. We can also take that information that we got back from Windows Live ID, and off of that identifier, go ahead and access. We ask it for a ticket to other Microsoft services. So the user wants to go ahead and use a different service, let's say the Spaces service, he doesn't have to log in again. And we'll see an example of that in a second as well. Just want to throw out something in case some of you were wondering, like, it seems like a lot of talking, a lot of effort just for a password, just for a username and password. What is it saving us? So for us as developers, it's saving it all that much. We've all written applications where we collect username and password. The big deal here is for the user. The user doesn't have to go ahead and remember yet another username and password. Or he doesn't have to have another little stick-it note on his computer saying, okay, the username and password for this application is this, which is ugly and a security breach, right? The idea here is that there's 450 million, I think, Live ID users. So they all know their password. They go to a lot of sites every day. They know those username and password pretty well. We're making it easy for them in our application to say, go ahead, we'll customize our application for you, but you don't have to remember another username and password. Just go ahead and use your Live ID username and password for our application as well. And that, I think, is where the big gain is in terms of what we're building and what we're offering our potential clients. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And this is a sample. This is the sample that comes together with the SDK. We'll play with that a little bit, and then we can go ahead and maybe customize it a bit as well. You know what? Before we customize it, let's run it. So here is a little app. First thing I have to do is, this is my application, and I'm going to can't do very much of anything until I sign in. So I sign in, I'll make a call to the SDK, we'll run through the code in a little bit, and I get the standard client-side login page. I've been practicing today, so you see I have my two different logins, and I'm going to differentiate between the logins. So I have my Jackie at Renaissance and my test at Renaissance. So let's do the Jackie at Renaissance. That I don't have a good question for. I don't know if the. I understand the question that we can talk about after. We can try to hook up with the dev team about that as well. So I go ahead. I've been authenticated. Now I can go ahead and do a couple of things. So what this page is going to let me do, let's just go ahead and set the background color. Just something so I can differentiate my different users. So I set the background color. My background color is this lovely green. And now I want to go ahead and sign out. Now I'm going to come back. I'm going to sign in now as test. And my background is no longer green because I'm a different user. It recognizes I'm a different user. Again, that's data that I have in my database. For this user, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, set the background color here to something else. Instead of green, we'll make him an ugly blue. And so now when I log in as a different user, again, if I come back, obviously, as the first user again, I go back to my first set of settings, which is the green background. So that's just a simple example to show you how we can customize the application. Obviously, in our applications, we can do a lot more colors, other personalization, but it's just to simply show you, based on different users logging in, we get this identifier back from Windows Live ID server. We combine that with property to say, okay, this is the background color for this form. I can go ahead and customize my application like that. So let's take a look at what the code looks like for what we've done so far. So the first thing we have to do is create an instance of the identity manager. That's the top level object that we're going to be working off of. We have to pass in an application identifier, which is made up of different things: the company name, email address, etc., and the application name. We just pass that in, and we make the call to create instance. Assuming that's okay, we're going to go ahead. One of the things this little application supports is storing in my database a default user, so that the user doesn't have to go ahead and enter the username and password every time if he doesn't want to. So that's what he's checking for here, to see if there's a default username in the database. And the call, if there's no default user, it's to create identity. This is where I say, okay, I want to go ahead and create identity based on that information. That's what will cause the dialog to pop up, gather the information, and then we get this ID back. Assuming there's no error, we can go ahead and update the information on the screen based on the information that we got back. And here we just find out these different fields. Let's go ahead, make a little change here. Let's go ahead and say here, add to the bottom so we can see some other information. So we have OID dot username. So on the bottom, instead of just saying the user is signed in, I actually want to show what is the name of the user signing. I'm bouncing back and forth between these different usernames in my demo. Maybe I'll forget which one is which. Let me go ahead and show you how that identity that's returned from the authentication server includes a nice readable username piece of information for me. So I go ahead and I can sign in. I'm signing in as Jackie. I've got my green, and then down here I have signed in Jackie at Renaissance. That is another piece of information I can pull back on the object that's returned to me from the authentication server. Let's run through now the next piece of the story here. The next piece of the story is that, okay, I've authenticated this user. I know he exists. He's been in my app before. I can customize and personalize my app for him, yellow, green, blue, whatever else, whatever other customizations I want. But now I want to take it a step further. Now I want to go ahead and say, okay, now that have your live ID, I have a link to your live ID, I want to go ahead and access another Microsoft service without you having to sign in again. And let's see how we can do that. So here I'm going to log in with my test account. Okay. Logged in as test at Renaissance. And now I want to go put something, push a blog entry onto my Spaces blog. So I have my RCS test account, and this is going to be TechEd Barcelona, and the body is just going to be Ola from sunny Barcelona. Oops. Go ahead and post that blog. I set this breakpoint here just to get an idea of what's happening now. Basically, until now, we've set everything up. The interesting line of code is this next line of code that says, take the ID that I got back from the server and get a ticket. It's something that will authenticate me and give me the access and allow me to go ahead and push something against the API for Spaces, which is this storage.msn.com web service. So I say, off the authentication that was returned to me, I want a ticket so I can go ahead and access this service with these other parameters. Go ahead, give me one of those, please. So once I've got that ticket, I'm going to go ahead, fill out the request, and ultimately make a post and push that out to my Spaces. So let's let that run through. The blog request was sent. And so the next thing I can do, I can come back here, try the view blog. Well, the view blog is actually using a different technique to try to get there. He's going to use a technique that says, instead of get ticket approach, what he's doing is trying to open authenticated browser. Here's the link to my Spaces blog. Pull this out that I typed in the RCS test for my blog name at Spaces. Open authenticated browser means off that same identity object, open a browser window that's already authenticated because Live ID already authenticated me before I got to here. So let's see how that went. There's that browser window. Okay, let's have a problem with that. So we're going to just go ahead and look at that ourselves. That's test. So that is pass. And here is the blog entry that we pushed in from the rich client without having to sign in again. So the client was able to use the credentials that I got via the get ticket to allow me to access the Spaces blog, to go ahead and push that blog entry out onto the blog. So that's the integration. When we talk about how Live ID is a single integrated thing for many different Microsoft services, it allows me to avoid very often single sign-on for the user. That's an example of that. I signed on once to my little application. Via that information, I could derive the necessary credentials to go ahead and post onto my Spaces blog. And that's Live ID for client applications. So I want to run straight away into another demo, which is my Northwind mashup. Like I said, I can't do a demo without including the Northwind database. And what we're doing here is bringing together a couple of different sources. What I want to do is I want to map, on a virtual Earth map, customers of interest to me. I'm going to pull the customers table from Northwind. I'm going to have to go ahead and geocode them, because Northwind doesn't have geocode information on customers. So I'll have to take their address information and geocode them. Now, Virtual Earth knows how to do that, but to make it interesting, I decided to use a different geocoding service, something that's offered by Yahoo. So you can see how you can bring in different services from different people and make them work together. So I'm going to take the information out of Northwind, geocode it using Yahoo, and then put it on the map using Virtual Earth. And of course, all this in a WIN format. Okay. Just waiting for this Visual Studio to shut down. Okay. So here we'll walk through the code, see exactly what phase is being implemented by what piece of the code against which of the different data sources that we mentioned, whether it's Yahoo Virtual Earth or my local Northwind database. Okay. Let's just get started just to play with the app a little bit. Now, one of the tricky things I mentioned earlier, and I'll show it to you in the code, is it's very nice I can go ahead and render Virtual Earth inside a browser control in my WinForm. That's not very challenging technologically. The more challenging part is how do I respond to events that are happening on the Virtual Earth control and catch them up in my WinForms control. And that's, again, the solution isn't terribly complicated either, but it is until you figure it out or find it. So we'll take a look at that. But here's the control. We start with the default map view. Obviously, I can use it manually. Point. But we're going to go ahead and try to use it programmatically as well. So we're going to pick some semi-random latitude and longitude. Let's say 11 and 15. Make a call to position the map, and that brings me to the middle of Africa. I can go ahead and change the zoom level to reposition the map. I can just zoom out if I want. I can obviously go ahead, if I want to switch to an aerial view now, I can go ahead and change the view back. So I guess it's set to a road view programmatically. So let's take a look at the code for that, and then we'll go on to bringing the data from Northwind and Yahoo. So the elements of this application is basically we have the main form, which is form 1. We have the data set for the data, which we'll get to soon. And then we have this HTML, which we're going to load into the browser on that main form. So let's take a look at that HTML. This is where some of the Virtual Earth stuff gets done. Some of it we push in from the WinForm, some of it will get done locally on the HTML page. I'm not sure why my machine is slowed down like this. Some of these now. Okay. So the first thing I do is load in my Java control for Virtual Earth, version 6. And then I set up some of the routines that I want. And here's probably that little trick that I talked about. I don't want to say the most exciting part here, but certainly you should take this away with you as a tip and trick. How do I get the events from the Java events from the HTML page up to the WinForm? And for that, the HTML supplies this specifically. Window.external, which is the containing window for this form, will expose. This is the method that I wrote up on there, map position change, and I can just pass the information in. This is the part that's built into the document model for the HTML that exposes this external object that links from the browser page to who's ever hosting it. And that's the way I get the events back up. The only events I'm really catching here is every time there's a change in the location of the map, whether I change the zoom or I change the latitude and longitude, or I pan or I scroll, I want to update those text boxes up in the left-hand corner on the WIN form. And the way I do that is by catching this event, which gets transmitted through this method. So here, similar to what we saw in the SDK, I want to have the start virtual Earth. I pass in location information, how big I want my window to be, what style, the map style. I start off by default road. These are the different events I'm catching: end of a pan, end of a zoom, or end of a change view. If I change from aerial to road or something like that. Anytime one of those happen, I want to update the WIN form. When all that's done, I'll just post an event to say that I'm all finished. Here are just some methods just to make my life a little bit easier down here. Set center and zoom, pass in latitude and longitude and zoom, and then make the method on the map. A couple of other methods. Add pushpin. Add pushpin, actually, this is nice encapsulation here. This is a method I wrote for an earlier version. In version 5 of the Virtual Earth Control, they actually changed the way you use pushpins. They combined a couple of APIs, so you don't really have a specific pushpin API anymore. It's just a shape. So I was able to keep all the code the same and just go ahead, instead of this one line that I had before, use the new shape objects within my code to handle the new way of doing things in the latest version of the control. So that's what that does. And that's really it, what we have in the HTML that gets loaded on the form. If we go back up to the form, we can look at the code. It handles those events and makes the calls down into the control as well. So again, here's my application ID, so I can use the control and knows who I am. On the form load, I just figure out where's that HTML, so I could go ahead and load that into the map browser control. That's the HTML to get everything started. And then I tell the map browser control that the object for scripting is me. That's the way it knows how to pass back to me those events. Here's where I actually tell the browser to get started, pass in the necessary parameters that I want. Wherever I want to take that from, I can go ahead and do that. Set the latitude, longitude, and zoom. Down here is where I catch the callbacks from the map itself to update position labels, which is called by the map position change. That's the method being called by the map control on the callback. I get that latitude, longitude, and zoom information. I take that, pass it to this local method to do what it wants to do. All it's doing now is updating the text boxes with that data. So every time the map is moved, I have the latest and greatest information there. These are just some constants to make my calls into the JavaScript in the other direction a little bit easier. So when I come down here and I want to execute, this is just my utilities execute script where I pass in one of these constants. So for example, when I want to do a move map, I execute the script set center and zoom, and I pass in the related parameters. So that's what covers the basic map information. Let me set a breakpoint here. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull the data out of Northwind database, call Yahoo to geocode it, and pass that information to put the little push pins on the map. Now I have to admit this was another last-minute change. I always had a nice little grid on the bottom of this form showing the Northwind data, and everything worked fine until I came here last night to do a tech check on the computer and to make sure the computer was able to show up on the screen. And it turns out that the resolution of the video projector was so much lower than the resolution that I'm used to working on my computer, that part of the screen was cut off. So I had to go ahead and add a separate window, a little separate form to display the customer information, pick what I want, and push that information down onto here. So here's that other form. So we're going to make the call to the database and populate that form. 1 second. Everything's running, so this is start it again. Okay, let's kill it and start it again. Make sure there's size of life, and then we'll go get the customer data. I guess I could blame on the internet connection. Okay. Let's see, the map is working. Okay. Let's try again to get the customer information. Okay, so there's good old Northwind customers table. What I want to do now, I'm going to go ahead and sort our country. We'll localize this app. So we're going to look for Spain. And I just have to add some region information. As soon as I do that, I'll be able to push that and locate those customers on the virtual Earth map. It does not normally run this slow. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to put it in EMEA. Okay. I'm going to pick them one at a time. We'll start with Madrid. I'm making the call down back to the main form. Find customer. So what are we going to do now? What we're going to do now, we're going to set up the call to Yahoo. I'm passing in a customer row. It says all that information. This is the geocode service for Yahoo. I'm just going to go ahead now and set up a web request. So we'll step through that. Standard web request code. I'm going to pull out of the customer row the pieces of information that I need to geocode it, which is the address, city, state, and zip. Yahoo also requires an application ID so they can know who I am as well. So we pull out that information, build the rest of the request, go ahead and do the get response call on the request, and then see if there's a response. If there's a response, I'm going to then go ahead and parse the XML document that I get back as a response from Yahoo. It's basically making a REST call. I can go ahead and do that, and then for each of those nodes, pull out, so this is a single node, pull out the latitude and longitude, and then move map to that location. I have the pinpoint in that location. Next thing I'm going to do in the code, and we'll go through the code as long as we're here, is I'm going to take some additional information and put that up in the little bubbles next to the push pin, so that when I locate myself on a push pin, I have additional information. What's the name of the customer and his address information. So this is the details string I'm building up over here. Here I make the call again. I'm in the WIN form now. I'm making the call down into the virtual Earth JavaScript. So that's the execute script that we looked at earlier. And I'm going to place the push pin. So let's let it go. So it's gone ahead It's located 1. Let's try to get, so if I hover over that, I'll get information about that. That's the name of that customer. If you remember, he was located in Madrid. That's the address information that I pushed in. Again, everything here can be customized. I can customize the way the push pin looks. I can customize the way the bubble looks. But this is just a simple way, quick and easy, of getting the information available and displaying it. And so obviously I could go ahead and push another one. Let's go back to Barcelona now and do the same thing. Since the computer seems terribly uncooperative. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. The form, we put it out here in Barcelona. If we scroll, if we zoom in, it'll actually get out of the ocean back on land. It's just the resolution of that large push pin relative to the zoom that map was being shown at. Go back on land, and again, same thing here. Obviously, we can go ahead, look at the push pin. There's the name of the customer. There's the address information. So what we did in that demo, we pulled together information from 3 different sources. Northwind database for my customers, whatever database you store your customer information in. Take their address information, geocode it using Virtual Earth services, Yahoo services, some other services that you think are better or you have a deal with to geocode them. Take that geocode information, the latitude and longitude, and go ahead and plot that information along with whatever other customer information you want to include on the push pins with their pop-up bubbles on your Virtual Earth map. So I want to wrap up just with some places for you to go to in terms of ideas and data sources. So we saw some of you said the starting point is dev.live.com, specifically for Virtual Earth. Go to the Virtual Earth hanging off of that. Hanging on the Codeplex site from Microsoft, you have a couple of very sophisticated Windows Live quick apps. Again, those are mainly web applications, and we're talking about WinForm applications here. But if you want to get an idea of what can be done with some of the Windows Live platform and some ideas people have for building mashups and combining information, those are really good samples. You can run the samples. You can take the code, read the code, work through the code, change the code. That's a great link. Yahoo has a nice developer site where they give you code samples like Microsoft in all different languages, VB, C#, PHP, Java, whatever you want. So they have some nice information on their services. Amazon Web Services. Amazon has a couple of interesting services, not only to access Amazon's book information and product information, but just general information, somewhat similar to if you're catching Microsoft is doing now, Amazon's been doing for a while now, which is basically offering data center services to you. You can go ahead and buy storage and bandwidth from Amazon extremely cheaply, and the access to that storage and to set that up is via web services. And we actually recently went ahead. It's called S3 storage, very simple storage, and it was simple to implement. We had something that we thought would overwhelm our web server of videos. We said instead of putting that video on our own web servers, let's go ahead and offload that to Amazon. That worked pretty nicely. So you can sign up for just hanging off your regular account, sign up for a web services account. They have some other interesting web services, some interesting ideas. You might want to check that out. Programmable web. This is, if you want to ask the question, what sources of information are available to me? If I want to include in my application, this is probably the first website you want to go to. This has a large collection not only of sources of information, different mashups that people have built, different samples, information about the different markets. So if you just saw here you have different mashups, new mashups. You want to look at different mashups people have built, you can go ahead and play with them. And for each mashup, you can get information on what data sources they're using, and that'll point you to information about those particular data sources, so you can go ahead and use them yourselves in your application as well. So this is you can waste days just going around this website looking at all the different interesting pieces of information that are available on the web and that are available programmatically. So from code, you can go ahead and access them and incorporate them in your applications. And while that's coming up, the last one here is StrikeIron. StrikeIron is also a vendor of different web services, different information sources. What's different about StrikeIron is that in general, he's actually guaranteeing that the data will be available. It's actually a more commercial venture. Most of the data sources on programmableweb.com are available free. And again, you kind of get what you pay for. It's available for free, but there's no guarantees. If you need some guaranteed service level, and we'll talk about that in a second in the final slide, then you want to check out some of the things that are available here on Strike Iron. So it's going to cost you some more money, but if you're building a serious application where you can't afford to take any chances, you want to check out some of the things available on Strike Iron. So just before summarizing, we talk about all these great web sources, all this information. A couple of things you still have to keep in mind. Licensing, just because you can do something doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. And that's something I ran into with Microsoft. A lot of the controls are available. I could go ahead and use them on my WinForm applications, but the licensing prevents me from doing that. So you have to check out both the technology side and the licensing side of any sort of external data that you want to be using. You have to be aware of the limitations of use. And Microsoft Windows Live Platform has limitations. They're very reasonable limitations, but you need to be aware of them. Any other vendor you go to, again, be aware of what the limitations are and what's going to cost me if I am super successful and exceed those limitations. The other thing is no SLAs, no service level agreement. Nobody's, in general, I want to know if I'm building a commercial application, is somebody guaranteeing me that it will always be available, it won't go down, and I'll have the required bandwidth to support all my customers. So those are issues if you're building commercial applications you want to be aware of and ask the right questions. And in terms of identity, when I'm tying all these things together, it's just a question you need to be thinking about. Security and identity, we don't want to make our users log in a million different times just for bringing in data from 10 different sources. So we saw a little bit how we can handle that using Windows Live ID, but when you go to other vendors, that's a question you want to be asking. So in summary, first off, go ahead, familiarize yourselves with Windows Live and other sources and services that are available out there. Again, Windows Live has a lot of great stuff, and maybe you'll say, well, I'm not too happy that I can't use those in WinForm applications, and you may not be happy, but the answer may be, well, the stuff offered by Windows Live Platform is so great, I'm just going to go ahead and build a web application. So that's something to be aware of, so familiarize yourself with what's available there. On the other hand, mashups, it's associated with the internet, but it doesn't have to be a browser application. We saw a bunch of different applications, my Northwind demo applications that are mashups, but don't live inside a browser. Remember that only a few data sources today really have service level agreements. This is something that will evolve over time as people start building more and more commercial applications with these data sources and tools. And just go out, have a beer, and just think of different ways to mash up all these different sources of data. Here's just a quick slide of other sessions available at TechEd. Some of them happened already, so you can check out the slides and the videos when they're available. Then you have a couple more on Wednesday and Thursday on the Windows Live platform. Catherine is doing a session on the lap around Windows Live, and there are a couple other sessions. If you want to check that out, check out these sessions. Here's some more general resources on Windows Live and Virtual Earth and mashups. Of course, fill out your forms. It's very simple. Go over the terminal, check off all 9s for this session, and earn your chance to win a nice little prize. And I'm around through the end of Thursday, so catch me now, catch me later with any questions you may have. Thanks a lot.